The Elementary Forms of the Religious Life by Émile Durkheim. Book number 2, The Elementary Beliefs. Part number 9. The Idea of Spirits and Gods. When we come to the idea of the soul, we have left the circle of purely impersonal forces. But above the soul, the Australian religions already recognize mythical personalities of a superior order, spirits, civilizing heroes, and even gods who are properly so called. While it will be unnecessary to enter into the detail of the mythologies, we must at least seek the form in which these three categories of spiritual beings are presented in Australia, and the way in which they are connected with the whole religious system. A soul is not a spirit. In fact, it is shut up in a determined organism, though it may leave it at certain moments, it is ordinarily a prisoner there. It definitely escapes only at death, and we have already seen the difficulties under which the separation is accomplished. A spirit, on the contrary, though often tied by the closest bonds to some particular object, such as a spring, a rock, a tree, a star, etc., and though residing there by preference, may go away at will and lead an independent existence in free space. So it has a more extended circle of action. It can act upon the individuals who approach it or whom it approaches. The soul, on the contrary, has almost no influence except over the body it animates. It is very exceptional that it succeeds in influencing outside objects during the course of its terrestrial life. But if the soul does not have the distinctive characteristics of the spirit, it acquires them, at least in part, at death. In fact, when it has been disincarnated, so long as it does not descend into a body again, it has the same liberty of movement as a spirit. Of course, after the rites of mourning have been accomplished, it is thought to go to the land of souls, but before this it remains about the tomb for a rather long time. Also, even after it has definitely departed, it is believed to prowl about in the brush near the camp. It is generally represented as a rather beneficent being, especially for the surviving members of its family. We have seen that the soul of the father comes to aid the growth of his children or his grandchildren. But it also happens sometimes that it shows signs of a veritable cruelty. Everything depends upon its humor and the manner in which it is treated by the living. So it is recommended, especially to women and children, not to venture outside of the camp during the night so as not to expose oneself to dangerous encounters. However, a ghost is not a real spirit. In the first place, it generally has only a limited power of action. Also, it does not have a definite province. It is a vagabond, upon whom no determined task is incumbent, for the effect of death has been to put it outside of all regular forms. As regards the living, it is a sort of exile. A spirit, on the other hand, always has a power of a certain sort, and it is by this that it is defined. It is set over a certain order of cosmic or social phenomena. It has a more or less precise function to fulfill in the system of the universe. But there are some souls which satisfy this double condition and which are consequently spirits, in the proper sense of the word. These are the souls of the mythical personages whom popular imagination has placed at the beginning of time, the Altgirngemitjana, or the men of the Altjaringa among the Arunta, the Muramura among the tribes of Lake Ayr, the Mukurnai among the Kurnai, etc. In one sense, they are still souls, for they are believed to have formerly animated bodies from which they separated themselves at a certain moment. But even when they led a terrestrial life, they already had, as we have seen, exceptional powers. They had a mana superior to that of ordinary men, and they have kept it. Also, they are charged with definite functions. In the first place, whether we accept the version of Spencer and Gillen or that of Strello, it is to them that the care of assuring the periodical recruiting of the clan falls. They have charge of the phenomena of conception. Even when the conception has been accomplished, the task of the ancestor is not yet completed. It is his duty to guard over the newborn child. Later, when the child has become a man, he accompanies him in the hunt, brings game to him, warns him by dreams of the dangers he may run, protects him against his enemies, etc. On this point, Strello is entirely in accord with Spencer and Gillen. It is true that someone may ask how it is possible, according to the version of these latter, for the ancestor to fulfill this function, for, since he reincarnates himself at the moment of conception, it seems as though he should be confounded with the soul of the child and should therefore be unable to protect it from without. But the fact is that he does not reincarnate himself entirely, he merely duplicates himself. One part of him enters the body of the woman and fertilizes her, another part continues to exist outside and, under the special name of Arambaranga, fulfills the office of guardian genius. Thus we see how great a kinship there is between this ancestral spirit and the genius of the Latins or the delta alpha mu omega nu of the Greeks. The identification of function is complete. In fact, at first the genius is the one who begets, qui gignet, he expresses and personifies the powers of generation. But at the same time, he is the protector and director of the particular individual to whose person he is attached. He is finally confused with the personality itself of this individual. He represents the totality of the proclivities and tendencies which characterize him and give him a distinctive appearance among other men. Hence come the well-known expressions indulgere genio, defraudere genium, with the sense of to follow one's natural temperament. At bottom, the genius is another form or double of the soul of the individual. This is proved by the partial synonymy of genius and manes. The manes is the genius after death, but it is also all that survives of the dead man, that is to say, his soul. In the same way, the soul of the Arunta and the ancestral spirit which serves as his genius are only two different aspects of one and the same being. But it is not only in relation to persons that the ancestor has a definite situation, he also has one in relation to things. Though he is believed to have his real residence under the ground, they think that he is always haunting the place where his nanja tree or rock is, or the waterhole which was spontaneously formed at the exact spot where he disappeared into the ground, having terminated his first existence. As this tree or rock is believed to represent the body of the hero, they imagine that the soul itself is constantly coming back there, and lives there more or less permanently. It is by the presence of the soul that they explain the religious respect inspired by these localities. No one can break the branch of a nanja tree without a risk of falling sick. Formerly the act of breaking it down or injuring it was punished with death. An animal or bird taking refuge there could not be killed. Even the surrounding bushes had to be respected, the grass could not be burned, the rocks also had to be treated with respect. It was forbidden to remove them or break them. As this sacred character is attributed to the ancestor, he appears as the spirit of this tree or rock, of this water hole or spring. If the spring is thought of as having some connection with rain, he will become a spirit of rain. Thus, the same souls which serve as protecting geniuses for men also fulfill cosmic functions at the same time. It is undoubtedly in this sense that we must understand the text of Roth where he says that in northern Queensland, the spirits of nature are the souls of the dead who have chosen to live in the forests or caves. So we have here some spiritual beings that are different from the wandering souls with no definite powers. Strello calls them gods, but this expression is inexact, at least in the great majority of cases. If it were true, then in a society like the Arunta where each one has his protecting ancestor, there would be as many or more gods than there are individuals. It would merely introduce confusion into our terminology to give the name of God to a sacred being with only one worshipper. It may be, of course, that the figure of the ancestor grows to a point where it resembles a real divinity. Among the Warramunga, as we have already pointed out, the clan as a whole is thought to be descended from one sole and unique ancestor. It is easily seen how this collective ancestor might, under certain circumstances, become the object of a collective devotion. To choose a notable example, this is what has happened to the snake Walunqua. This mythical beast, from whom the clan of the same name is held to be descended, continues to live, they believe, in water holes which are therefore surrounded with a religious respect. Thus it becomes the object of a cult which the clan celebrates collectively, through determined rites, they attempt to please him and to win his favors, and they address to him all sorts of prayers, etc. So we may say that he is like a god of the clan. But this is a very exceptional case, or even, according to Spencer and Gillen, a unique one. Normally, the word spirits is the only one suitable for designating these ancestral personages. As to the manner in which this conception has been formed, we may say that it is evident from what has preceded. As we have already shown, the existence of individual souls, when once admitted, cannot be understood unless one imagines an original supply of fundamental souls at the origin of things, from which all the others were derived. Now these archetype souls had to be conceived as containing within them the source of all religious efficacy, for, since the imagination does not go beyond them, it is from them and only from them that all sacred things are believed to come, both the instruments of the cult, the members of the clan and the animals of the totemic species. They incarnate all the sacredness diffused in the whole tribe and the whole world, and so they are attributed powers noticeably superior to those enjoyed by the simple souls of men. Moreover, time by itself increases and reinforces the sacred character of things. A very ancient Chlinga inspires much more respect than a new one, and is supposed to have more virtues. The sentiments of veneration of which it has been the object during the series of successive generations who have handled it are, as it were, accumulated in it. For the same reason, the personages who for centuries have been the subject of myths respectfully passed on from mouth to mouth, and periodically put into action by the rites, could not fail to take a very especial place in the popular imagination. But how does it happen that, instead of remaining outside of the organized society, they have become regular members of it? This is because each individual is the double of an ancestor. Now when two beings are related as closely as this, they are naturally conceived as incorporated together. Since they participate in the same nature, it seems as though that which affects one ought to affect the other as well. Thus the group of mythical ancestors became attached to the society of the living. The same interests and the same passions were attributed to each, they were regarded as associates. However, as the former had a higher dignity than the latter, this association takes, in the public mind, the form of an agreement between superiors and inferiors, between patrons and clients, benefactors and recipients. Thus comes this curious idea of a protecting genius who is attached to each individual. The question of how this ancestor came to have relations not only with men, but also with things, may appear more embarrassing, for, at the first glance, we do not see what connection there can be between a personage of this sort and a rock or tree. But a fact which we owe to Strello furnishes us with a solution of this problem, which is at least probable. These trees and rocks are not situated at any point in the tribal territory, but, for the most part, they are grouped around the sanctuaries, called Urt-Nachulunga by Spencer and Gillen and Arnanoa by Strello, where the Chlinga of the clan is kept. We know the respect with which these localities are enhaloed from the mere fact that the most precious instruments of the cult are there. Each of these spreads sanctity all about it. It is for this reason that the neighboring trees and rocks appear sacred, that it is forbidden to destroy or harm them, and that all violence used against them is a sacrilege. This sacred character is really due to a simple phenomenon of psychic contagiousness, but in order to explain it, the native must admit that these different objects have relations with the different beings in whom he sees the source of all religious power, that is to say, with the ancestors of the Alcharinga. Hence comes the system of myths of which we have spoken. They imagined that each Urt-Nachulunga marked the spot where a group of ancestors entered into the ground. The mounds or trees which covered the ground were believed to represent their bodies. But as the soul retains, in a general way, a sort of affinity for the body in which it dwelt, they were naturally led to believe that these ancestral souls continued to frequent these places where their material envelope remained. So they were located in the rocks, the trees, or the water holes. Thus each of them, though remaining attached to some determined individual, became transformed into a sort of genius loci and fulfilled its functions. The conceptions thus elucidated enable us to understand a form of totemism which we have left unexplained up to the present. This is individual totemism. An individual totem is defined, in its essence, by the two following characteristics. 1. It is a being in an animal or vegetable form whose function is to protect an individual. 2. The fate of this individual and that of his patron are closely united. All that touches the latter is sympathetically communicated to the former. Now the ancestral spirits of which we have just been speaking answer to this same definition. They also belong, at least in part, to the animal or vegetable kingdoms. They, too, are protecting geniuses. Finally, a sympathetic bond unites each individual to his protecting ancestor. In fact, the Nanja tree, representing the mystical body of this ancestor, cannot be destroyed without the man's feeling himself menaced. It is true that this belief is losing its force today, but Spencer and Gillen have observed it, and in any case, they are of the opinion that formerly it was quite general. The identity of these two conceptions is found even in their details. The ancestral souls reside in trees or rocks which are considered sacred. Likewise, among the Yuelai, the spirit of the animal serving as individual totem is believed to inhabit a tree or stone. 312 This tree or stone is sacred, no one may touch it except the proprietor of the totem. When it is a stone or rock, this interdiction is still absolute. The result is that they are veritable places of refuge. Finally, we have seen that the individual soul is only another aspect of the ancestral spirit. According to Strello, this serves after a fashion, as a second self. Likewise, following an expression of Mrs. Parker, the individual totem of the Yuelai, called Yunbia, is the alter ego of the individual. The soul of a man is in his Yunbia and the soul of his Yunbia is in him. So at bottom, it is one soul in two bodies. The kinship of these two notions is so close that they are sometimes expressed by one and the same word. This is the case in Melanesia and in Polynesia, Atai in the island Mota, Tamaniu in the island Aurora, and Talaja in Matla. All designate both the soul of the individual and his personal totem. It is the same with Ato in Samoa. This is because the individual totem is merely the outward and visible form of the ego or the personality, of which the soul is the inward and invisible form. Thus the individual totem has all the essential characteristics of the protecting ancestor and fills the same role. This is because it has the same origin and proceeds from the same idea. Each of them, in fact, consists in a duplication of the soul. The totem, as the ancestor, is the soul of the individual, but externalized and invested with powers superior to those it is believed to possess while within the organism. Now this duplication is the result of a psychological necessity, for it only expresses the nature of the soul which, as we have seen, is double. In one sense, it is ours, it expresses our personality. But at the same time, it is outside of us, for it is only the reaching into us of a religious force which is outside of us. We cannot confound ourselves with it completely, for we attribute to it an excellence and a dignity by which it rises far above us and our empirical individuality. So there is a whole part of ourselves which we tend to project into the outside. This way of thinking of ourselves is so well established in our nature that we cannot escape it, even when we attempt to regard ourselves without having recourse to any religious symbols. Our moral consciousness is like a nucleus about which the idea of the soul forms itself, yet when it speaks to us, it gives the effect of an outside power, superior to us, which gives us our law and judges us, but which also aids and sustains us. When we have it on our side, we feel ourselves to be stronger against the trials of life, and better assured of triumphing over them, just as the Australian who, when trusting in his ancestor or his personal totem, feels himself more valiant against his enemies. So there is something objective at the basis of these conceptions, whether we have in mind the Roman genius, the individual totem, or the Alcheringa ancestor, and this is why they have survived, in various forms, up to the present day. Everything goes just as if we really had two souls, one which is within us, or rather, which is us, the other which is above us, and whose function it is to control and assist the first one. Fraser thought that the individual totem was an external soul, but he believed that this exteriority was the result of an artifice and a magic ruse. In reality, it is implied in the very constitution of the idea of the soul. The spirits of which we have just been speaking are essentially benefactors. Of course they punish a man if he does not treat them in a fitting manner, but it is not their function to work evil. However, a spirit is in itself just as capable of doing evil as good. This is why we find a class of evil geniuses forming itself naturally, in opposition to these auxiliary and protecting spirits, which enables men to explain the permanent evils that they have to suffer, their nightmares and illnesses, whirlwinds, and tempests, etc. Of course, this is not saying that all these human miseries have appeared as things too abnormal to be explained in any way except by supernatural forces, but it is saying that these forces are thought of under a religious form. As it is a religious principle which is considered the source of life, so, all the events which disturb or destroy life ought logically to be traced to a principle of the same sort. These harmful spirits seem to have been conceived on the same model as the good spirits of which we have just been speaking. They are represented in an animal form, or one that is half animal, half man, but men are naturally inclined to give them enormous dimensions and a repulsive aspect. Like the souls of the ancestors, they are believed to inhabit trees, rocks, water holes and subterranean caverns. Taking the Arunta as a particular example, Spencer and Gillen say expressly that these evil geniuses, known under the name of Arunca, are beings of the Alcheringa. Many are represented as the souls of persons who had led a terrestrial life. Among the personages of the fabulous epoch, there were, in fact, many different temperaments. Some had cruel and evil instincts which they retained, others were naturally of a bad constitution, they were thin and emaciated. So after they had entered into the ground, the Nanja rocks to which they gave birth were considered the homes of dangerous influences. Yet they are distinguished by special characteristics from their confreres, the heroes of the Alcharinga. They do not reincarnate themselves. Among living men, there is no one who represents them, they are without human posterity. When, judging from certain signs, they believe that a child is the result of their work, it is put to death as soon as born. Also, these belong to no determined totemic group, they are outside the social organization. By all these traits, they are recognized as magic powers rather than religious ones. And in fact, it is especially with the magician that they have relations, very frequently it is from them that he gets his powers. So we have now arrived at the point where the world of religion stops and that of magic commences, and as this latter is outside the field of our research, we need not push our researches further. The appearance of the notion of spirits marks an important step in advance in the individualization of religious forces. However, the spiritual beings of whom we have been speaking up to the present are as yet only secondary personages. They are either evil working geniuses who belong to magic rather than religion, or else, being attached to determined individuals or places, they cannot make their influence felt except within a circle of a very limited radius. So they can only be the objects of private and local rites. But after the idea has once been established, it naturally spreads to the higher spheres of the religious life, and thus mythical personalities of a superior order are born. Though the ceremonies of the different clans differ from one another, they all belong to the same religion, nonetheless, also, a certain number of essential similarities exist between them. Since all the clans are only parts of one and the same tribe, the unity of the tribe cannot fail to make itself felt through this diversity of particular cults. In fact, there is no totemic group that does not have Ching and bull roarers, and these are used everywhere in the same way. The organization of the tribe into phratries, matrimonial classes, and clans, and the exogamic interdictions attached to them, are veritable tribal institutions. The initiation celebrations all include certain fundamental practices, the extraction of a tooth, circumcision, subincision, etc., which do not vary with the totems within a single tribe. The uniformity on this point is the more easily established as the initiation always takes place in the presence of the tribe, or at least, before an assembly to which the different clans have been summoned. The reason for this is that the object of the initiation is to introduce the neophyte into the religious life, not merely of the clan into which he was born, but of the tribe as a whole, so it is necessary that the various aspects of the tribal religion be represented before him and take place, in a way, under his very eyes. It is on this occasion that the moral and religious unity of the tribe is affirmed the best. Thus, in each society there are a certain number of rites which are distinguished from all the others by their homogeneity and their generality. So noticeably a harmony seemed to be explicable only by a unity of origin. So they imagined that each group of similar rites had been founded by one and the same ancestor, who came to reveal them to the tribe as a whole. Thus, among the Arunta, it was an ancestor of the Wildcat clan, named Pushya 317, who is thought to have taught men the way of making chewinga and using it ritually. Among the Waramunga, it was Murtu. Among the Urubana, Widerna, it was Atnatu. Among the Kadish and Tendun. Among the Kurnai. Likewise, the practice of circumcision is attributed by the Eastern Diri and many other tribes to two special Muramura, and by the Arunta to a hero of the Alcharinga, of the lizard totem, named Mangarkanjurkanjia. To this same personage are ascribed the foundation of the matrimonial institutions and the social organization they imply, the discovery of fire, the invention of the spear, the buckler, the boomerang, etc. It also happens very frequently that the inventor of the bull roarer is also considered the founder of the rites of initiation. These special ancestors cannot be put in the same rank as the others. On the one hand, the sentiments of veneration which they inspire are not limited to one clan, but are common to the whole tribe. On the other hand, it is to them that men ascribe all that is most esteemed in the tribal civilization. For this double reason, they became the object of a special consideration. For example, they say of Atnatu that he was born in heaven at an epoch even prior to the times of the Alcharinga, that he made himself and that he gave himself the name he bears. The stars are his wives and daughters. Beyond the heaven where he lives, there is another one with another sun. His name is sacred, and should never be pronounced before women or non-initiated persons. Yet, howsoever great the prestige enjoyed by these personages may be, there was no occasion for founding special rites in their honor, for they themselves are only rites personified. They have no other reason for existence than to explain existing practices. They are only another aspect of these. The chewinga and the ancestor who invented it are only one. Sometimes, both have the same name. When someone makes the bull roarer resound, they say that it is the voice of the ancestor making himself heard. But, for the very reason that each of these heroes is confounded with the cult he is believed to have founded, they believe that he is attentive to the way in which it is celebrated. He is not satisfied unless the worshippers fulfill their duties exactly. He punishes those who are negligent. So he is thought of as the guardian of the rite, as well as its founder, and for this reason, he becomes invested with a veritable moral role. 4. However, this mythological formation is not the highest which is to be found among the Australians. There are at least a certain number of tribes who have arrived at a conception of a god who, if not unique, is at least supreme, and to whom is attributed a preeminent position among all the other religious entities. The existence of this belief was pointed out long ago by different observers, but it is Howitt who has contributed the most to establishing its relative generality. In fact, he has verified it over a very extended geographical area embracing the state of Victoria and New South Wales and even extending up to Queensland. In all this entire region, a considerable number of tribes believe in the existence of a veritable tribal divinity, who has different names, according to the district. The ones most frequently employed are Bunjil or Punjil, Daramulun, and Byami. But we also find Nurali or Nurel, Kohine, and Manganengaya. The same conception is found again farther west, among the Naranyiri, where the great god is called Nurundari or Ngurundari. Among the Diri, it is probable that there is one of the Muramura, or ordinary ancestors, who enjoys a sort of supremacy over the others. Finally, in opposition to the affirmations of Spencer and Gillen, who declare that they have observed no belief in a real divinity among the Arunta, Strello assures us that this people, as well as the Loricgia, recognize, under the name Altgyra, a veritable good God. The essential characteristics of this personage are the same everywhere. It is an immortal, and even an eternal being, for it was not derived from any other. After having lived on earth for a certain length of time, he ascended to heaven, or else was taken up there, and continues to live there, surrounded by his family, for generally he is said to have one or several wives, children, and brothers, who sometimes assist him in his functions. Under the pretext of a visit he is said to have made to them, he and his family are frequently identified with certain stars. Moreover, they attribute to him a power over stars. It is he who regulates the journey of the sun and moon, he gives them orders. It is he who makes the lightning leap from the clouds and who throws the thunderbolts. Since he is the thunder, he is also connected with the rain. It is to him that men address themselves when there is a scarcity of water, or when too much falls. They speak of him as a sort of creator. He is called the father of men and they say that he made them. According to a legend current around Melbourne, Bunjil made the first man in the following manner. He made a little statue out of white clay, then, after he had danced all around it several times and had breathed into its nostrils, the statue became animated and commenced to walk about. According to another myth, he lighted the sun, thus the earth became heated and men came out of it. At the same time that he made men, this divine personage made the animals and trees. It is to him that men owe all the arts of life, arms, language, and tribal rights. He is the benefactor of humanity. Even yet, he plays the role of a sort of providence for them. It is he who supplies his worshippers with all that is necessary for their existence. He is in communication with them, either directly or through intermediaries. But being at the same time guardian of the morals of the tribe, he treats them severely when these are violated. If we are to believe certain observers, he will even fulfill the office of judge. After this life, he will separate the good from the bad, and will not reward the ones like the others. In any case, they are often represented as ruling the land of the dead, and as gathering the souls together when they arrive in the beyond. As the initiation is the principal form of the tribal cult, it is to the rites of initiation that he is attached especially. He is their center. He is very frequently represented by an image cut on a piece of bark or soaked into the ground. They dance around it, they sing in its honor, they even address real prayers to it. They explain to the young men who the personage is whom this image represents. They tell them his secret name, which the women and the uninitiated cannot know. They relate to them his history and the part attributed to him in the life of the tribe. At other times they raise their hands towards the heaven where he is thought to dwell, or else they point their arms or the ritual instruments they have in hand in this direction. This is a way of entering into communication with him. They feel his presence everywhere. He watches over the neophyte when he has withdrawn into the forest. He is attentive to the manner in which the ceremonies are celebrated. The initiation is his cult. So he gives special attention to seeing that these are carried out exactly. If there are any faults or negligences, he punishes them in a terrible manner. Moreover, the authority of each of these supreme gods is not limited to a single tribe, it is recognized equally by a number of neighboring tribes. Bunjil is adored in nearly all of Victoria, Byami in a considerable portion of New South Wales, etc. This is why there are so few gods for a relatively extended geographical area. So the cults of which they are the object have an international character. It even happens sometimes that mythologies intermingle, combine, and make mutual borrowings. Thus the majority of the tribes who believe in Byami also admit the existence of Daramulun. However, they accord him a slighter dignity. They make him a son or brother of Byami, and subordinate to this latter. Thus the faith in Daramulun has spread in diverse forms, into all of New South Wales. So it is far from true that religious internationalism is a peculiarity of the most recent and advanced religions. From the dawn of history, religious beliefs have manifested a tendency to overflow out of one strictly limited political society. It is as though they had a natural aptitude for crossing frontiers, and for diffusing and internationalizing themselves. Of course there have been peoples and times when this spontaneous aptitude has been held in check by opposed social necessities, but that does not keep it from being real and, as we see, very primitive. To Tyler this conception has appeared to be a part of so elevated a theology that he refuses to see in it anything but the product of a European importation. He would have it be a more or less denatured Christian idea. Andrew Lang, on the contrary, considers them autochthonous, but as he also admits that it is contrasted with all the other Australian beliefs and rests on completely different principles, he concludes that the religions of Australia are made up of two heterogeneous systems, superimposed one upon the other, and consequently derived from a double origin. On the one hand, there were ideas relative to totems and spirits, which had been suggested to men by the sight of certain natural phenomena. But at the same time, by a sort of intuition as to the nature of which he refuses to make himself clear, the human intelligence succeeded at the first onset in conceiving a unique God, creator of the world and legislator of the moral order. Lang even estimates that this idea was purer of foreign elements at the beginning, and especially in Australia, than in the civilizations which immediately followed. With time, it was covered over and obscured little by the ever-growing mass of animistic and totemic superstitions. Thus it underwent a sort of progressive degeneration up to the day when, as the effect of a privileged culture, it succeeded in coming into its own and restated itself again with more force and clarity than it had in the first place. But the facts allow neither the septical hypothesis of Tyler nor the theological interpretation of Lang. In the first place, it is certain today that the ideas relative to the great tribal god are of indigenous origin. They were observed before the influence of the missionaries had as yet had time to make itself felt. But it does not follow that it is necessary to attribute them to a mysterious revelation. Far from being derived from a different source than the regular totemic beliefs, they are, on the contrary, only the logical working out of these beliefs and their highest form. We have already seen how the notion of mythical ancestors is implied in the very principles upon which totemism rests, for each of them is a totemic being. Now, though the great gods are certainly superior to these, still, there are only differences of degree between them. We pass from the first to the second with no break of continuity. In fact, a great god is himself an ancestor of a special importance. They frequently speak to us about him as though he were a man, endowed, to be sure, with more than human powers, but one who lived a human life upon the earth. He is pictured as a great hunter, a powerful magician, or the founder of the tribe. He was the first man. One legend even represents him in the form of a worn-out old man who could hardly move about. If a supreme god named Muramura has existed among the Diri, the very word is significant, for it serves to designate the class of the ancestors. Likewise, Nurali, the name of a great god among the tribes on the Murray River, is sometimes used as a collective expression which is applied to the group of mythical beings whom tradition places at the origin of things. They are personages wholly comparable to those of the Alcharinga. In Queensland, we have already met with the god Anja or Anger, who made men but who seems, nevertheless, to be only the first man. A fact that has aided Australian thought to pass from the numerous ancestral geniuses to the idea of the tribal god is that between the two extremes a middle term has been inserted, which has served as a transition. These are the civilizing heroes. The fabulous beings whom we call by this name are really simple ancestors to whom mythology has attributed an eminent place in the history of the tribe, and whom it has, for this reason, set above the others. We have even seen that they ordinarily form a part of the totemic organization. Mangarkanjurkanjia belongs to the lizard totem and Pushia to the wildcat totem. But on the other hand, the functions which they are believed to fulfill, or to have fulfilled, are closely similar to those incumbent upon a great god. He, too, is believed to have introduced the arts of civilization among men, to have been the founder of the principal social institutions and the revealer of the great religious ceremonies which still remain under his control. If he is the father of men, it is because he manufactured them rather than begot them, but Mangarkanjurkanjia also made them. Before his time, there were no men, but only unformed masses of flesh, in which the different members and even the different individuals were not yet separated from one another. It was he who cut up this original matter and made real human beings out of it. Between this mode of fabrication and the myth we have spoken of attributes to Bunjil, there are only shades of difference. Moreover, the bonds uniting these two sorts of figures to each other are well shown by the fact that a relationship of descent is sometimes established between them. Among the Kurnai, the hero of the bull roarer, Tundan, is the son of the great god Munganenga'a. Likewise, among the Ualai, Daramalun, the son, or brother of Byami, is identical with Gayandi, who is the equivalent of the Tundan of the Kurnai. Of course, it is not necessary to conclude from these facts that the great god is nothing more than a civilizing hero. There are cases where these two personages are carefully differentiated. But if they are not confounded, they are at least relatives. So it sometimes happens that we find it hard to distinguish them. There are some who could be classified equally well in one category or the other. Thus, we have spoken of Atnatu as a civilizing hero, but he comes very near to being a great god. The notion of a supreme god even depends so closely upon the entire system of the totemic beliefs that it still bears their mark. Tundan is a divine hero, as we have just seen, who is very close to the tribal divinity. Now among the Kurnai, the same word means totem. Similarly, among the Arunta, Altjira is the name of a great god. It is also the name of the maternal totem. 325. But there is more to be said than this. Many great gods have an obviously totemic aspect. Daramalun is an eagle hawk, his mother, an emu. It is also under the features of an emu that Byami is represented. The Altjira of the Arunta has the legs of an emu. Before being the name of a great god, Nurali designated, as we just saw, the ancestor founders of the tribe. Now some of these were crows, the others hawks. According to Howitt, Bunjil is always represented in a human form. However, the same word serves to designate the totem of a phratry, the eagle hawk. At least one of his sons is among the totems included in the phratry to which he has given, or from which he has taken his name. His brother is Palian, the bat. Now this latter serves as sexual totem for the men in many tribes in Victoria. We can even go farther and state more definitely the connection which these great gods have with the totemic system. We have just seen that Bunjil is the totem of a phratry. Daramalun, like Bunjil, is an eagle hawk, and we know that this bird is the totem of phratries in a large number of southeastern tribes. We have already pointed out that Nurali seems to have originally been a collective term designating indistinctly either eagle hawks or crows. Now in the tribes where this myth has been observed, the crow is the totem of one of the two phratries, the eagle hawk, that of the other. Also, the legendary history of the great gods resembles that of the totems of the phratries very closely. The myths, and sometimes the rites, commemorate the struggles which each of these divinities fought against a carnivorous bird, over which it triumphed only with the greatest difficulty. Bunjil, the first man, after making the second man, Kerwin, entered into a conflict with him, and in the course of a sort of duel, he wounded him severely and changed him into a crow. The two species of Nertalier are represented as two hostile groups which were originally in a constant state of war. Byami, on his side, had to fight against Mullian, the cannibal eagle hawk, who, by the way, is identical with Daramalun. Now, as we have seen, there is also a sort of constitutional hostility between the totems of the phratries. This parallelism completes the proof that the mythology of the great gods and that of these totems are closely related. This relationship will appear still more evident if we notice that the rival of the god is regularly either a crow or an eagle-hawk, and that these are quite generally the totems of the phratries. So Biami, Daramalun, Nurali, and Bunjil seem to be phratry totems who have been deified, and we may imagine that this apotheosis took place as follows. It is obviously in the assemblies which take place in regard to the initiation that the conception was elaborated, for the great gods do not play a role of any importance except in these rites, and are strangers to the other religious ceremonies. Moreover, as the initiation is the principal form of the tribal cult, it is only on this occasion that a tribal mythology could arise. We have already seen how the rituals of circumcision and subincision spontaneously tend to personify themselves under the form of civilizing heroes. However, these heroes exercised no supremacy, they were on the same footing as the other legendary benefactors of society. But wherever the tribe acquired a livelier sentiment of itself, this sentiment naturally incarnated itself in some personage, who became its symbol. In order to account for the bonds uniting them to one another, no matter what clan they belonged to, men imagined that they were all descended from the same stock and that they were all descended from a single father, to whom they owe their existence, though he owed his to no one. The god of the initiation was predestined to this role, for, according to an expression frequently coming to the lips of the natives, the object of the initiation is to make or manufacture men. So they attributed a creative power to this god, and for all these reasons, he found himself invested with a prestige setting him well above the other heroes of the mythology. These others became his auxiliaries, subordinate to him, they were made his sons or younger brothers, as was the case with Tundun, Gayandi, Kerwin, Palian, etc. But other sacred beings already existed, who occupied an equally eminent place in the religious system of the clan. These were the totems of the phratries. Wherever these are maintained, they are believed to keep the totems of the clans dependent upon them. Thus they had all that was necessary for becoming tribal divinities themselves. So it was only natural that a partial confusion should arise between these two sorts of mythical beings. It is thus that one of the two fundamental totems of the tribe gave his traits to the great god. But as it was necessary to explain why only one of them was called to this dignity and the other excluded, they supposed that this latter, in the course of a fight against his rival, was vanquished and that his exclusion was the consequence of his defeat. This theory was the more readily admitted because it was in accord with the rest of the mythology, where the totems of the phratries are generally considered enemies of one another. A myth observed by Mrs. Parker among the Yuelai may serve to confirm this explanation, for it merely translates it into figurative language. It is related that in this tribe, the totems were only the names given to the different parts of Biami's body at first. So the clans were, in a sense, the fragments of the divine body. Now is this not just another way of saying that the great God is the synthesis of all the totems and consequently the personification of the tribal unity? But at the same time, it takes an international character. In fact, the members of the tribe to which the young initiates belong are not the only ones who assist at the ceremonies of initiation. Representatives from the neighboring tribes are specially summoned to these celebrations, which thus become sorts of international fairs, at once religious and laical. Beliefs elaborated in social environments thus constituted could not remain the exclusive patrimony of any special nationality. The stranger to whom they are revealed carries them back to his own tribe when he returns home, and as, sooner or later, he is forced to invite his former hosts, there is a continual exchange of ideas from tribe to tribe. It is thus that an international mythology was established, of which the great God was quite naturally the essential element, for it had its origin in the rites of initiation which it is his function to personify. So his name passed from one language to another, along with the representations which were attached to it. The fact that the names of the phratries are generally the same in very different tribes could not fail to facilitate this diffusion. The internationalism of the totems opened the way for that of the great God. We thus reach the highest conception to which totemism has arrived. This is the point where it touches and prepares the religions which are to follow, and aids us in understanding them. But at the same time, we are able to see that this culminating idea is united without any interruption to the crudest beliefs which we analyze to start with. In fact, the great tribal God is only an ancestral spirit who finally won a preeminent place. The ancestral spirits are only entities forged in the image of the individual souls whose origin they are destined to explain. The souls, in their turn, are only the form taken by the impersonal forces which we found at the basis of totemism, as they individualize themselves in the human body. The unity of the system is as great as its complexity. In this work of elaboration, the idea of the soul has undoubtedly played an important part. It is through it that the idea of personality has been introduced into the domain of religion. But it is not true that, as the theorists of animism maintain, it contains the germ of the whole religion. First of all, it presupposes the notion of mana or the totemic principle of which it is only a special form. Then, if the spirits and gods could not be conceived before the soul, they are, nevertheless, more than mere human souls, liberated by death, else whence would come their supernatural powers? The idea of the soul has merely served to direct the mythological imagination in a new way and to suggest to it constructions of a new sort. But the matter for these conceptions has been taken, not from the representation of the soul, but from this reservoir of the anonymous and diffused forces which constitute the original foundation of religions. The creation of mythical personalities has only been another way of thinking of these essential forces. As for the notion of the great God, it is due entirely to the sentiment whose action we have already observed in the genesis of the most specifically totemic beliefs. This is the tribal sentiment. In fact, we have seen that totemism was not the work of isolated clans, but that it was always elaborated in the body of a tribe which was to some degree conscious of its unity. It is for this reason that the different cults peculiar to each clan mutually touch and complete each other in such a way as to form a unified whole. Now it is the same sentiment of a tribal unity which is expressed in the conception of a supreme God, common to the tribe as a whole. So they are quite the same causes which are active at the bottom and at the top of this religious system. However, up to the present, we have considered the religious representations as if they were self-sufficient and could be explained by themselves. But in reality, they are inseparable from the rites, not only because they manifest themselves there, but also because they, in their turn, feel the influence of these. Of course the cult depends upon the beliefs, but it also reacts upon them. So in order to understand them better, it is important to understand it better. The moment has come for undertaking its study.